And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents. This is Brothers of the Serpent Podcast, and we are coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 Tangent Cube of Science, where we are nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau, and we are at the end of our harvest season.
Yes.
So,
our estate harvest.
One more, our estate harvest. One more big push for us tomorrow, I think. And most of that will be done, and after that it's just winemaking, which is a more leisurely process for the most part.
Yeah. There's a couple of real huge pains in the
ends, the pressing is a big pain, but
tomorrow we got to process fruit.
Yeah.
It's all got picked last night. All night.
Yeah.
I came home at like 6:30.
Oh, really? Yeah. I left at like 2:30.
Yeah. Oh, my mic is turned way down. What's the deal here? Yeah, so that was pretty cool. We hired a hand-picking crew that came in, and I just got to hang out, and we were sort of sorting fruit and getting rid of...
We were moggers.
Material other than grapes. Getting rid of material other than grapes. And,
so the guys would come and dump their bins into the big bin, and then we just sort through and pull out leaves and,
Yeah. And it's going to be the cleanest fruit we've ever had. That was really great. Loved it. And so we have 9 harvest bins that I think they're 176-gallon bins. We got 9 of those. One of them is partially full, but the rest are very full.
They're like half-ton bins or 1-ton bins?
Yeah, they're half-ton, but I mean, that doesn't mean you have a half a ton in there.
Sure, yeah.
And
if it was liquid, it would be basically a half-ton,
It would be more.
More than half-ton? Okay.
If it was full. I don't know what's a half-ton of, but that's what they're called.
Yeah, what is it, a half-ton of gravel?
It's what people call it's a half-ton of gravel. Not nearly as much.
No, not gravel.
It would be way more.
Pudding. A half-ton of pudding. Apples.
I don't know. But they're definitely not a half-ton of grape clusters. It's much less.
They're
but
industry
liquid,
standard for
way
something,
more.
right? They're harvest bins, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Food processing bins.
Yeah.
Anyway, they're 176 gallons. So they're big, and 9 of them are very full. So I'm betting we're going to have between 2 and 3 tons, just based on what we got before.
2 and 3 tons of processed, like crushed, destemmed grapes and juice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which gives us about 5 tons total for this year.
Yeah. And we got 10 last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we have more vines this year and got half the amount of grapes. Yeah. It was just a very dry year. I mean, we watered them basically all year, but...
Yeah, but the biggest problem was the fruit set when it was so windy.
Yeah, that's right.
And it just
very windy.
Destroyed the little tiny flowers on the grapes.
Yeah.
And so the clusters aren't full. Like there's this thing called berry closure when all the little green grapes start to swell and then they turn purple. They go through veraison and then they swell even more and they push up against each other and the whole cluster actually closes up. So there's space on the inside where the rachis is, the stem basically of the grape cluster, but the grapes all close off that space. And so that's when there's like a significant threat of getting a fungus growth. So that's a particular time we have to spray, make sure we protect the grapes from getting disease. But this year we didn't hardly have berry closure. I mean, there wasn't enough berries to push up against each other, so they were open. So it was like that's another thing about this year that's going to be interesting is that we hardly sprayed anything because it was so dry.
Yeah.
So that's better.
Yep. I mean, there was a couple of months there where you were spraying quite a bit, but that was just... It was not nearly as much as you've had to do in other years.
Well, you start as soon as you prune the grapes. I mean, when the grapes are completely dormant, but then you go prune them you've got all these open wounds. So I sprayed like you would spray an antifungal on like you'd put Neosporin on a wound or something. Basically, I went and sprayed a sort of a antifungal thing for all the wounds.
Yeah.
And then once they sprout and they have green leaves, we call it bud break, when all the little buds are blooming, you start spraying it when they're about 2 inches tall. It's on a schedule every 14 days or whatever. But then if you have rain, if you have a lot of moisture, you got to pick up the pace. You got to spray a little more. But then all the moisture stopped, and I never sprayed again.
Yeah.
After that.
Right. Okay.
So that's what we deal with here in Texas. I mean, you can't grow grapes here if you don't spray fungicides. It's the name of the game.
Yep. Yeah, so tomorrow is going to be processing, and that's actually, it takes a long time, but most of it is cleaning and prep.
Yeah.
And then you do the actual processing, and then afterwards it's cleaning again.
I mean, I recorded a video of it. It took us 6 minutes to do a bin.
Yeah.
So we've got 9 bins.
Right.
So it's not going to take long. 1 hour will basically be done.
Yeah.
Processing all those grapes and getting them into the bin. And then
after we've spent 4 hours setting up and then 4 hours cleaning up afterwards.
Yeah.
But then we've got the must, the juice and the skins, and we take them into the winery, and then we have to do a bunch of tests, and you've got to
figure your volume.
Yeah, you got to figure out the volume, you got to figure out the pH, the TA, and then
this time I wrote down, I don't know why I didn't do this before, but I just wrote down basically the gallons per inch.
Yeah.
Of vertical height on a tank. So I've got it written down now. We just get it in there. We measure down from the top of the tank to the surface of the liquid and subtract that from the height of the interior of the box.
Yep.
And then you multiply that number times the gallons per inch.
Yep. And
that's how we do our calculations. So that makes it a little easier.
Yeah. Remember when we first started this, we were figuring out by gallons by putting that into buckets and counting the buckets as we God. Because we were using unknown containers, and so you'd fill up a bucket and you dump it out, and you're like, that's 5 gallons.
That's true, because I can go online to Macro Bin.
Yeah.
You know, the company that makes the macro bins.
Yeah, and get the internal.
These are 5 feet tall. The bins that we actually ferment in, they're big.
Yeah.
They're 4 feet wide and 5 feet tall.
Yeah.
And square. So yeah, I can go on there and I can see the exact specs from the company.
Yeah.
You know, and then okay, so here's the total gallonage, and here's the height of the interior of the box, and then you can just divide that and get a rough. You know, it's got curved corners, so it's not exact, but it's close enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, then we test it all and figure out, okay, well, what's the pH? What is the acidity level? What's the sugar level?
Yep.
And then we make adjustments from there, try to get it to this, you know,
we have a target
optimal range. And we don't really mess with sugar levels because we're not going to add sugar.
Yeah.
It's just going to be what it is, but it's probably going to end up being around 13.5% alcohol wine.
Right.
I'm going to assume that based on the samples I took in the vineyard. And then,
so what's amazing though is like we're doing all this. We have all this equipment, all this technology, all this chemistry stuff, a whole lab full of stuff, but at the same time you're doing it and you're thinking, but people did this without any of this stuff.
Yeah, they didn't make as good a wine.
Yeah, it probably wasn't as good.
They had a higher probability of failure.
Yeah, yeah.
That's really all.
So is that what it's about? It's just like all of our equipment and all of our lab stuff and tests and everything is about lowering the possibility of failure?
That's exactly right. Because you could completely wing it and never test anything and still make some really amazing wine, but you'll also probably have some wines where you're like, oh my God, what happened to this?
Yeah, time to make brandy.
Yeah. And you won't know when that's going to happen.
Yeah.
So it's about being able to control that.
Yeah.
I mean, a dissolved oxygen meter. Think about that. Like, we don't have one, but I can borrow one from Maureen at the university.
Yeah.
She brought that out that one time because we had the wine sitting in these big plastic totes that are not designed to protect the wine from oxidation.
Yeah.
And so the plastic's permeable, and it had to stay in there because I didn't have barrels.
Oh, right.
And it stayed in there for like over a week, and we were trying to bottle. So she brought the dissolved oxygen meter out, and we stuck it down in there and measured, well, how much oxygen has this wine taken up? And then we had a sparging stone.
Yep. We sparged
We
it.
hooked into the bottom valve of the tank, and it's this little, they call it a sparging stone, but it's basically like
a copper
very
sponge.
fine screen
Yeah.
made of metal,
Yeah.
stainless steel. And then you pump nitrogen gas into it, and it creates this really fine foam, all these tiny bubbles of nitrogen, and they scrub the oxygen out of the wine. And so we were sitting there sparging the wine with the nitrogen gas and then measuring in the meter and just watching the dissolved oxygen drop.
Yeah.
Until it was at a good level where okay, this is not going to turn into sherry.
Right.
So yeah, you couldn't control these things or even measure them.
Yeah.
And so if you had a situation where you have a large vat of wine that gets exposed to a lot of oxygen, and then you're bottling it, and well, you've just decreased the shelf life of that wine greatly by doing that.
Yeah, and they didn't even necessarily know that. They would not have thought of it as exposure to oxygen, just air, right? It would just be.
Yeah, I just imagine back then they didn't worry about shelf life because it's more wine.
Yeah, that's right. What shelf life?
I'm just kidding. But, it's kind of what you think, right? Bring out the casks.
That's right. You just got to throw more parties faster. Yeah, this wine got exposed to air, so we need to have big parties.
But you do think, it is pretty amazing when you think about the fact that people were making this product back in the day, and they were using caves. They knew to maintain that temperature
right
at these optimal levels. They gravity fed the wine from one vessel to another to remove lees and all that.
Sure,
so they were.
yeah.
How did they do? Did they put it in a freaking aqueduct? What hoses did they have? It's interesting to try to imagine how they did it.
Yeah, it would be cool if we can get over to, I don't know, over to Greece, whatever, and see some old, tour some really old winemaking places.
Yeah, and I did in Italy.
In Italy, yeah.
Man, we went through some caves that were they had tombs in them.
I know, but they had tombs, but did you see here's how they flowed the wine from one to the next? In other words, that's what I mean.
No, I can't say that I did. Of course, I didn't know anything about making wine then either.
Okay, yeah.
A lot of it was just, I was just in there just seeing, one of these caves had this giant room, and there were just these huge oak barrels. I mean, they were oval shaped instead of round.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, they had to be 10, 15 feet tall, these gigantic oak vessels down in this huge room in this cave. And they were just boom, 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 just going all the way down. And there's it was so badass. I was just like, wow, that's a lot of wine. That is a lot of wine.
Yeah.
That's another way to get around oxygen. The oxygen problem is just to make it in huge amounts. Because then your surface area to volume ratio is so different that it doesn't matter as much.
Yeah. Yeah, big, tall containers.
Yeah, but think about it, being down in a cave, fermenting vast amounts of wine that the cave just fills up with CO2 and you can't get rid of it.
You can't breathe.
So the whole place is scrubbed of oxygen. You got to run down there and do something and run out.
Yeah.
You need to have a rope tied around you.
Right.
I was thinking about that today because I was in the winery by myself, and we've got these 2 vats in there. One of them's giant and it's fermenting away.
Yep.
I was punching it down, and I kind of got a little lightheaded, and I was like, dude, if I pass out in here, I'm dead.
Yeah. You're going to fall in the wine and die.
Laura would be checking on me. You would because we had podcast, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
She might think, well, he's just working late.
Yeah.
But she'd be like, hey, dude, where are you at? I'm not answering the phone. Guys coming there.
I'm just like, I found him face down in the vat of wine.
But it'd probably push me up because of all the effervescence. I'd just be floating on the top with the grapes.
Yeah, and we're gonna have what, 3 of those?
I think
Big ones?
Yeah, probably 3 of them. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's gonna be.
Gonna
We'll have some fun with this with the CO2 meter again this year.
Yeah, watch it peg out.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fun, and we're every year we learn more, and we get better at different methods, and driving around a lot and talking to these other winemakers and seeing how people do stuff and doing research, and so yeah, I feel pretty confident in what we're doing. I can see the tendency to want to do more tinkering.
Yep.
And I recently bought some products that I thought, oh, okay, this would help improve the wine. And one of them is an enzyme. And I was going to put it in the wine. It's a color extraction enzyme. Help you get more color and better color stability. And I looked on the back of the thing, and a lot of it's in French,
Right.
But there's this thing back there that says may cause allergic reactions.
Oh.
So I didn't put it in there.
Sure.
I was just like, dude, why wasn't this in the catalog?
Yeah.
But I've heard of people saying, oh, I can't drink red wine, or I can't drink Merlot, or I can't drink Cabernet Sauvignon because it gives me.
Oh, man.
So when they say that one specific wine grape, like Cabernet Sauvignon, gives them an allergic reaction or whatever, I would assume that it's because some grapes have more color and better color stability than others, and maybe Cab, a lot of people add other things to Cab to kind of make its color a little more vibrant. They blend it with other grapes. So if you're just making Cab, maybe these people are adding these color enzymes, and certain people are having allergic reactions, and they think they're just allergic to Cabernet Sauvignon.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah.
So I was like, nope, not doing it, not putting it in there.
Yeah,
Screw the color.
Color is important to people that drink wine, but there's other ways,
Yeah, well, we could even throw in some of the Montepulciano skins.
Yeah, because it has great color. Yeah.
You could press off the skins and just throw the skins in the Cab.
Yep.
And it'll extract color from those skins without adding juice.
Right. Yeah, that's a great idea.
It is a method people use, and they do that with Tannat because it's so red, right? Tannat is we harvested some of that, and we were trying to make rosé, and it's like it looks like red wine.
Yeah, we're like, this is too dark for a rosé. I mean, we pressed it off almost immediately, and it's already super dark. Yeah.
All right, well, that's the ag update. Get bang. Gents.
What else? We got rock and roll.
Sorry, I haven't posted much in the Patreon of the Dynasty account, but we are in the middle of harvest season.
Yeah, everything's really crowded.
I did throw up there I found one of the old, what I call the LP version of Wake of the Sun on an old Dropbox account that has that gigantic long outro. So the song's like almost 8 minutes long. I posted that up there.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And so you can hear how like Ty does some crazy shit with his pedal board, and then it merges into the Snake Bros theme song.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty cool. But yeah, there's definitely more stuff coming. And yeah, I mean, I still got to get on the CDs, and we got to do TeePublic, and the list goes on. But we got to get through harvest season here, folks.
Yeah, we got to get through that.
So,
and then travel season. Travel season's coming up after harvest season.
Travel season's coming up. True.
All right, Space Weather News.
Excellent.
After the rock and roll update thing. Sorry about that. Spaceweather.com, where we get all our space weather news. Geomagnetic unrest. A CME did hit Earth's magnetic field on August 20th. The weak impact caused an episode of geomagnetic unrest. Caused KP equals 4, but it was not a full-fledged geomagnetic storm. Another similar CME is expected to arrive on August 21st, and it could push the Earth's magnetosphere over the threshold of minor G1 class storming. High latitude skywatchers should remain alert for auroras. But Earth's magnetosphere is buzzing with activity. At least 3 CMEs have hit since August the 17th. None of them with great force, but altogether sufficient to spark multiple geomagnetic storms and substorms. On the 20th, auroras spilled over the Canadian border and into North Dakota. More auroras may be in the offing. Another CME is expected to graze Earth's magnetic field on August 21st, as we said, and NOAA forecasters say there is a chance of G1 class geomagnetic storms on both August 21st and 22nd.
Is it bad that I like sort of secretly want a big CME to like really disrupt some things just so that I can know what it's like?
I don't know.
I'm like, come on, man! Like,
Yeah.
hit the spring really hard and
Right, yeah.
Let's see some power get shut down.
Well, yes.
I mean, I
is
don't want
bad?
that because I love air conditioning. I really don't want that.
Yeah,
But
do it in the winter when we can set things on fire.
Yeah, at least then. But I'm
Of course.
more people die in the cold than they do.
I know, yeah.
But
And the southern hemisphere it'll be hot for them down there during our winter, so yeah.
the upside downs.
Yeah.
So the desire is just to see, like, well, can it be enough, but not too much, where we can kind of see what what it would be like.
You want a Goldilocks CME.
I want a little Goldilocks CME that will alert the world to this. Like, okay, here's what we're dealing with. Like, maybe we can fortify these systems and stockpile transformers and such.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with a bolide impact.
I want those too.
Yeah. It's like,
Yes.
can we get one that doesn't cause massive
Can we get another
loss of
Tunguska
life? Yeah.
over someplace that no one goes? You know, and just like watch it, really destroy some stuff.
Yeah, like maybe it could explode somewhere over a remote area of the Sahara and make a big glass bowl. Like it would,
yeah, dude. And then
see,
we could
that
take
would kill a
tours
lot
to
of desert animals, but it wouldn't kill people. But we could kind of, come to terms with the fact that,
it's such a huge desert that those animals have other places to be.
yeah, but the ones that are in that place will die.
Right, but it won't eradicate
Or one could
their
explode
species.
over the ocean, but that might cause tidal waves, and you just don't know.
No,
like-
we need to study what it does to the landscape.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't want it to happen, but I do. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
It's this
right.
weird thing where I'm like,
Sure.
come on, be a big one, but not too big. It's like storms, when a storm comes and you're like, oh yeah, look at this thing.
yeah, you want
And
it
it
to
does
be,
some really powerful, awesome stuff. You're like, yes.
yeah, and then
And
30 seconds later, it's just rain. You're like, dang it.
And then, you drive home and there's some signs down and you're like, yeah, and there's trees broken everywhere. And you're like, right on. The rivers are overflowing.
Yeah,
Roads are closed. It's great.
yeah.
But, if it got way worse than that, you'd be like, no.
Yeah,
Stop.
that's right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that's. I don't know if that's bad or not because I have the same thing. I'm sure plenty of people do.
Yeah, I'm in awe of these powerful forces.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's like you kind of want to see a quasar, but you don't want one to go off that close.
Right.
All right, current conditions. Solar wind speed is 565.2 kilometers per second. The density is 7.21 protons per cubic centimeter. Sunspot number is 56. And the neutron count is actually negative 0.1%.
So it's still below.
It's below the space age average.
Wow, what is going on with that? That's the second week in a row, or did it dip down some other time? Because I'm pretty sure you said it was below.
Yeah.
For the first time on the show.
Yeah. So, and that explains this graph, because I was asking, like, how can you count less than 0 neutrons? But the graph is about the average. Is it above or below the average? 0 being, yeah. So
the average in the
they're not
space age,
counting
which is
less than 0 neutrons. It's whether it's above or below the space age average. But I would assume
which is not a very long period of averaging.
right. And I also think that the space age average must be constantly changing, right? Like,
Yeah, but in that graph, it's always 0.
yes, it is always 0, but it must constantly change the actual
Yes.
amount. Yeah.
Yeah, so if it stays below the space age average for long enough, that will become the new space age average.
Yeah. Right.
And so it will slowly creep back upwards
Right.
to 0.
Yeah. Okay, so the KP index is 2 right now, quiet, but the 24-hour max was 4, unsettled. And that is your Space for the News for the week. And yes, I know we've been getting comments and emails from people saying you guys should go back. Go back over some of these things. And people are asking us to get Ben Davidson on.
Yeah, that would be great. I also suggested this too. I'm like, I've forgotten what some of these things are about
Yeah.
and the significance of them
Yeah.
since the last time you did a explanation of all that.
Okay.
Some other time. In the news, there are some pretty cool things. I have a story here about fusion. So investors have now spent $5 billion pursuing the holy grail of energy. So talking about in the story about all these private companies that are raising funds, and actually, a lot of these, technology companies, billionaires, whatever, are throwing money at developing fusion technology.
That's great.
So there's a whole bunch of different, I guess they're companies or they're startups, they call them, a handful of startups setting up shop to make nuclear fusion an everyday reality, is what they say in the story. So they go through all the different numbers of how much money all these different startups have to build stuff, and then later go into a description of the troubles with fusion. And it's interesting just how long we've been hearing about this, right? And it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
There's insane amounts of pressure that they need to contain the thing. And so far, I think they've
Yeah, it's a materials problem, right?
I think they've actually made it happen, but it's not a net positive energy. They had to put more energy into it than they got out because of our limitations on containing it.
Containment, yeah.
So there is a company that says, let's see, Commonwealth Fusion Systems is collaborating with MIT to build their fusion reactor. The team has planned a fusion experiment they have dubbed Spark, which is about 1/65th the volume of the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor. The experimental reactor will generate about 100, is that megawatts? MW? Million watts? I don't know.
Megawatts?
Of heat energy in pulses of about 10 seconds. Bursts big enough to power a small city. The team anticipates that the output will be more than twice the power used to heat the plasma, thus overcoming the biggest technical hurdle in the field, positive net energy from fusion. The Spark team has set an ambitious target to have the reactor running in about 15 years.
Okay. God dang it.
But why have scientists so far failed at replicating a natural process that powers the stars in our universe? It turns out that conditions necessary for nuclear fusion to take place present an extreme challenge for us Earthlings. And so then they go on to describe some of these things. But anyway,
Or some people would argue that that's not what powers the stars, and that's why they can't do it.
Yeah, sure. Well, they can make fusion. They just can't make it net.
They can't keep
net
it going.
positive. They can't make it net positive.
Yeah, and I don't think they can keep it going either. Right? Like, aren't the longest
it's just a
sustained
loss.
fusion reactions just a couple of seconds at most?
Well, like they said, 10-second bursts.
Yeah, that's projected. 10-second bursts, every 10 seconds is creating a bunch of megawatts, right? That's what that was saying. But I think, maybe I'm wrong. But
Okay, so here we go. Unfortunately, every fusion experiment so far has been energy negative, taking in more energy than it generates, thus making it useless as a form of electricity generation.
Sure.
Getting the initial fusion reaction is not a problem.
Yeah.
Keeping it going is, as you said.
That's what I'm saying.
Not to mention that building nuclear reactors takes some extremely sophisticated feats of engineering.
Yeah.
But now scientists are confident that they are close to building a nuclear reactor that will produce more energy than it consumes.
Nuclear or fusion?
Nuclear reactor that will produce more energy than it consumes.
Okay.
The St. Paul Les Durance, France-based upcoming International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor is the world's largest fusion reaction facility that aims to develop commercially valuable fusion reactors. Funded by 6 nations, including U.S., Russia, China, Japan, South Korea, and India, ITER plans to build the world's largest tokamak fusion device, a donut-shaped cage that will produce 500
Donuts.
ME of thermal fusion energy. I don't know what ME is. Watcher? ME? Capital M, capital E. The device will cost $24 billion, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, with a delivery date of 2035.
Okay, so I just looked this up real quick.
Scientists, hold on, here we go. Real quick. Scientists have successfully developed a new superconducting material, essentially a steel tape coated with yttrium barium copper oxide, or YBCO, which allows scientists to build smaller and more powerful magnets. This lowers the energy required to get the fusion reaction off the ground. So there have been developments in other areas that is making this maybe more possible.
Okay.
Go ahead. What's the deal?
I just looked up longest sustained fusion reaction. There's multiple answers, but Wikipedia is saying that the record right now is China's experimental advanced superconducting tokamak, or EAST, a nuclear fusion reactor research facility, sustained plasma at 70 million degrees Celsius for as long as 1,056 seconds, which is 17 minutes, 36 seconds, achieving the new world record for sustained high temperatures.
Okay. I just say it's a good sign. This is my uplifting positive news segment.
Do we have a negative news segment?
I got one.
Yeah. I think that's great.
I mean, I have the news stories that I complain about. It's not that they're necessarily negative. It's just I complain.
Yeah.
About the journalist
well, that's
or
like
whatever.
Yeah,
you know.
that's our job too.
Yeah. So I find this to be great. I mean, I know people have issues
I would love
with billionaires, with their pet projects and stuff like that. But personally, I don't care. Dump more money into it. And if you have $1 billion, please do.
Yeah.
I don't care if you own the tokamak.
Right.
We want that energy.
Yeah. We want the tech overall.
We want the technology overall.
Yeah.
And once the technology is discovered, maybe the billionaire, this is not even a my lifetime situation. It's like, okay, maybe that billionaire profits off of it exorbitantly for his entire life. What does that matter? As long as we're getting cheaper and better energy that
cheaper, better, cleaner.
Yeah. And, and as you develop that technology and the devices get smaller and smaller and smaller. Now you're putting them on spacecraft, and I mean, this is what we need.
Put
folks.
them on spacecraft, then you've opened up the solar system.
This is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So who cares? Who is putting money? I don't care if Bill Gates is doing it. It just doesn't make any difference to me. Okay.
Yeah. And militaries, of course, that's the other thing we need. It has to be. I'm sure some people would argue that militaries have already developed this system.
Yeah.
But they're going to keep it secret and weaponize it or whatever. So what we want is public or private, not military companies doing this kind of thing. Universities working on it in cooperation with private investors, whatever. However it works out. But it's in an open scientific environment where people can, collaborate, and then you end up with hopefully large, relatively safe. No energy source is going to be safe, especially not super powerful ones, but large, relatively safe, clean.
Look, we're just looking for better and easier ways to boil water, folks.
Right.
Real quick, before we take the break, I'll just go through. I'm also excited about the NASA's new Return to the Moon mission.
Oh, yeah.
Finally.
Yeah.
I don't even know, what's the deal, but it's great. There's a story on phys.org about this. They've got the Artemis 1 And they're doing the uncrewed test flight, which will feature the first blast off of the massive space launch system, the SLS rocket, which will be the most powerful in the world when it goes into operation.
This is so great.
It will propel the Orion crew capsule into orbit around the moon. The spacecraft will remain in space for 42 days before returning to Earth. So
40 days and 40 nights.
yeah. So this is another thing I'm excited about.
Or
Let's go back
42,
to the moon.
answer to life.
I'm not a moon
universe
hoaxer,
and
so
everything.
let's go back. But even if we didn't go, let's go, right? Like, who cares if we didn't ever go before? That's people get hung up on that. Let's go. Whether we went there before
The
or
belts
not.
are in the way.
Well, go through one of the holes in the belts. So the last story, real quick, is just an update on the. Was it Europa we were talking about? I think it was a different moon.
Enceladus?
Enceladus. Okay, so this, I think.
Europa's the other icy one.
Yes, this I think will
that's the
shed
Jupiter
some
one.
light on the
Enceladus
questions.
is Saturn, right? This is Jupiter.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this will shed some light on some of the questions about the salinity of the water. They'd go in this story. They're looking at the ice on Europa, and they're finding that they think they think that it's also got a similar salinity as Earth's oceans, and they're basically looking at the way the ice grows.
Okay.
Okay, so there's two different ways that the ice grows. One way is that the ice on the surface of the underside of the ice sheet builds up.
Okay.
Right? It's freezing to the surface of the ice sheet and getting thicker on the underside that's in contact with the ocean
Right.
water.
Yeah.
The other way is that super cooled water down below turns into a tiny fleck of ice and it floats up and sticks
Okay.
to the underside. So it's like raining ice onto the bottom of the ice, onto the underside of the ice sheet.
Raining upward.
It's raining upside down.
Or there's a plume and that falls as snow on the top of the thing, right?
Well, but they're talking about like in Europa where maybe it's not snowing up there.
Okay. There's no plumes on Europa. That's on Enceladus.
Yeah, that could be.
Yeah.
The plume would be for sure, but this is just talking about the growth in the ocean
Okay.
and on the underside. So the salinity plays a part in the crystallization of the water
Okay.
that would end up making these sort of
Nucleation points.
They're like freshwater ice,
Okay.
right? Maybe
Yeah.
they got some salt trapped in it, but they're more like they make the water saltier.
Yeah.
So anyway, just a couple of different. It's called.
Oh, okay. So the amount of ice is going to increase the salinity of the rest of the water. Is that part of what you're talking about?
Yes. So it says, okay, so they're saying they examined two classes of accreted ice found on Earth, congelation ice and frazzle ice. Now they're using Antarctica as a place to study. Congelation ice grows directly from the underside of the ice shelf. Frazzle ice forms as ice flakes, supercooled water which float upwards through the water, settling on the underside of the ice sheet itself. Both ways make ice that's less salty than the seawater.
Sure.
So therefore, it's concentrating.
And it increases the saltiness of the seawater.
So I was just thinking like, okay, they're not relating this to the other story, but the other story, they were talking about the thickness of the ice near the poles and all this kind of stuff. And they're saying this is giving us a clue based on ice formation and thickness at the poles, how salty the water is.
Yeah.
Because the more salty it is, the less it can accumulate, right, in the colder zones of the moon, which
Okay.
would be at its poles.
Yeah.
So if it's thinner, the ice is more salty, and if it's thicker, the ice is less salty.
The water?
The water. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay.
So anyway, that's my update on that. I don't know.
All right. Yeah, I think both of those moons, Europa and Enceladus, would be great to get. I mean, how would you explore them? We'd have to drill through the ice, and
You got to build a drill sub
yeah,
missile spacecraft. It's
yeah.
yeah. dart thing.
A drill, sub, missile, spacecraft, dart thing.
That's right.
Yeah, well, a thermal lance, right? If we had fusion power, then the thing could just land on the ice and get one end of it super hot and then just melt its way through.
That's the big problem with
But you need
space
energy.
exploration is because you want to be able to get off the planet that you want to explore or the moon or whatever.
Yeah.
And
no,
the problem-
everything is a one-way trip.
That's what I'm saying. Well, if you had fusion reaction, then you're good.
Yeah.
You're good.
Depending on what the fuel is, yeah. So if the fuel is like some kind of heavy water or whatever that you could carry around with you, but yes, yeah. And then you could land on a moon like that that's covered in ice and replenish your fuel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So
All right. Is it break time? Probably.
yeah, I won't do my negative news section this show.
Well, I have emails and I've got a news story, and we're just gonna do whatever.
All right, I'll do it. I'll do my one negative story.
I don't have a set topic for this episode. It's old school.
Hell yeah. All right, we'll
All
be
right.
right back.
Snakes.
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, the Snake Bros Institute for Advanced Coprolite Studies, where there are no degrees, only certificates of ignorance, which we willingly printed and admitted and signed ourselves. So we are espousing opinions and
speculation.
speculation. Yes.
Yeah. Espousing opinions and speculation.
And I'm sticking to them.
And they are subject to change at
You're
any
not
moment.
going to convince me of anything. No, all opinions are subject to change at any moment based on new data.
Yeah. Okay, I have one story. This is an interesting one from mysteriousuniverse.org. Great website, great podcast. This was just posted on August 20th, 2022 by Brent Swanser. This one's called Some Truly Bizarre and Mysterious Cases of Unexplained Mass Animal Deaths.
Wow.
So, this is sort of Fortean a bit, maybe a little spooky. It's just strange. Some of them, they probably have prosaic explanations, but they're interesting. So here we go. One persistent mystery of the natural world is that of mass animal deaths. There are countless instances of vast numbers of animals of all kinds suddenly seeming to just drop dead. But while many of these are eventually explained, there are others that remain firmly within the realm of mystery. So here we will look at a selection of cases of particularly bizarre mass animal deaths that have managed to conjure up mysteries, strange clues, and conspiracies, and which may never be truly solved. Our earliest and perhaps strangest one is a case that has long stirred controversy and conspiracy. On March 17th, 1968, at 12:30 a.m., a manager of a livestock company came across 3,000 dead sheep littering a field at Skull Valley, located in East Toole County, Utah, United States. Over the next several days, grazing sheep continued to die off by the hundreds, seemingly dropping dead in their tracks until the area was a veritable sea of sheep carcasses, an estimated 6,000 to 6,400 in total. Among these was the occasional live sheep, which were found shambling about, dazed and disoriented as if they were zombies or just sitting there staring into space. At the time, veterinarians could find no obvious cause for the deaths or the symptoms for those found alive, and the bizarre incident was soon hitting headlines around the country. The fact was not lost on anyone that these sheep were dying not too far from a place called the Dugway Proving Ground, which is a sprawling 800,000-acre military facility run by the U.S. Army, located around 85 miles southwest of Salt Lake City in Utah. This vast facility is a hodgepodge of target ranges, dispersal grounds, laboratories, and military bunkers, with one of its main purposes being to test United States and allied biological and chemical weapons defense systems and other unconventional military hardware in a secure and isolated environment. With all of the sheep dying off at the time, all eyes immediately turned to the mysterious top-secret installation, and there were rumors that the military had carried out some sort of nefarious test of a chemical or biological weapon. At the time, the main idea was that some sort of nerve agent had been tested in the area by the military, but there were some problems with this theory. For one, tests performed on the sheep turned up no evidence of a nerve agent, and there was also the fact that only sheep had died and no other animals. However, on March 13th, the military had indeed carried out a series of tests at the facility. One of these was a test firing of a chemical artillery shell in the second 160 gallons of the nerve agent compound VX were burned in an open pit at the base. And the third was a jet aircraft spraying nerve agent in a specific designated target area. These were all fairly routine tests at the base, business as usual, but it was this third test that was turning heads. It was thought that some of the VX nerve agent on board the plane had either leaked out of the aircraft or been blown by winds to settle on those sheep, and it certainly would have done the trick. This has long been a controversial weapon. This tasteless, odorless compound is 3 times as toxic as sarin, and a lethal dose, about one single drop, will cause convulsions, paralysis, and death within around 10 minutes for a full adult human.
Is this like you just touch it? Or it has to be inhaled?
Yeah,
like
no,
the gases
yeah,
of it have to be
I don't
inhaled,
know.
or
Yeah, is it like
ingested?
Topological? Yeah, I don't know.
Because I was, this is weird.
Sarin gas is what they're comparing it to. It's
Okay.
three times as toxic as that. And I guess, yeah, one drop of it aerosolized gets into your lungs, I guess. I don't know.
I was looking up this flower, like, that I think you can, like, just touch it and it can cause paralysis and stuff. It's weird.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's transdermal, whatever it is, yeah. So when confronted with this, the U.S. Army at first denied having had anything to do with the sheep deaths, underscoring that all of the tests performed had been routine and done far from populated areas in a remote area of the Utah desert. However, they would later admit that the VX spraying run had indeed experienced a bit of a mishap. It was explained that a spray nozzle had malfunctioned during the test, and that one of the canisters had not completely emptied and had begun leaking a small amount of VX as it flew over the area, climbing to higher altitudes. Considering that there had been high winds at the time and that the sheep had begun dying off the next day, it seemed obvious that this was the culprit. Other testimony came forward that further fueled this theory when Skull Valley resident, it's called Skull Valley, this is the other fun thing about this. Skull Valley resident Ray Peck claimed that he had seen numerous dead birds and a dying rabbit on his remote property, and that he had also experienced strange physical symptoms, including violent headaches, numbness, and an earache. Adding to the conspiratorial tone of the story was that he also claimed that an Army helicopter had landed at his home, and they had quickly collected the dead bodies, performed blood tests on his family, and left without explanation. This sounds all quite sinister, but the military denied having gone to Peck's property, and they also insisted that the amount of VX that had leaked was too small and too far away from Skull Valley to have killed so many sheep so quickly. They also showed that their tests on the sheep carcasses had turned up no trace of VX, and pointed out that the symptoms of the survivor sheep didn't fit those of the nerve agent. Veterinarians agreed, explaining that the sheep either wandered around or sat unmoving on the ground, but breathed normally and did not exhibit the asphyxiation or seizures that should have come from VX. There was also the fact that despite Peck's claims, no other animals of any type, including cows, horses, dogs, or even small animals like rabbits, mice, or birds, have been found dead.
Unselective in its damages to the other.
Yeah, so why was it only sheep if this was the work of VX? So this was all pretty mysterious. In the meantime, the Army continued to deny their part in the sheep's death and refused to take any responsibility for it. Despite these reassurances and the contradictory evidence that this had been the doing of VX, the damage had already been done. The public had been whipped up into a state of outrage that forced the U.S. military to change its policy, and it led to President Richard Nixon's decision to ban all open-air chemical weapon testing in 1969. In later years, a report unreleased to the public up to then would come to light that showed that the researchers from the U.S. Army's Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland had indeed found traces of VX in both snow and grass samples. So I was thinking about this, like if the sheep are eating this particular kind of grass and the stuff is in the grass, It's not going to kill dogs, but it should kill cows. I don't know. Yeah, it's weird. So the stuff that they found in the snow and grass was deemed capable of killing the sheep. Nevertheless, the U.S. Army continued to deny involvement, and we are still left with the fact that no other animals died in the incident, which leaves it shrouded in mystery. What really happened to those sheep? And it's possible that we may never know for sure. So moving along into more recent years, a very tragic and bizarre case happened in May of 2015 in the Uzbeki steppe lands of Kazakhstan, where thousands of a type of dog-sized antelope with outsized snouts called Saiga began turning up dead by the thousands. Locals were finding the animals, which wander over large tracts of Central Asian grassland, strewn out over the steppe in large numbers in positions that suggested they had just collapsed to drop dead on the spot. Over the course of just 2 weeks during the animals' summer calving season, a staggering 60,000 of these animals, male, female, and newborn alike, with some estimates even higher, had died practically simultaneously in a very sudden fashion and for no clear reason. It was an unprecedented mass animal die-off, and especially worrying since the Saiga is considered to be a critically endangered species, brought to the brink of extinction through poaching for their body parts, which are used in traditional medicines in China and Southeast Asia. With such low numbers, it is estimated that this one event had wiped out around 60% of their total population in a matter of days. Wow. It was so alarming that delegates from Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Mongolia, and China convened on an emergency to discuss the issue and try to get some answers, but few were forthcoming. There were many strange clues in the mass Saiga die-off. One was that it affected only Saiga and no other animal species in the area. There was also the fact that the animals seemed to have died nearly instantaneously, usually having collapsed or fallen face down in a manner that suggested they had just suddenly dropped dead rather than got sick and died over time. And they were also well-fed and seemingly healthy in every other respect. There was no deterioration or wasting away present to suggest they had died of a disease or a toxin. And another oddity was that the deaths had occurred over an area spread across 65,000 square miles, roughly the size of Florida. Yet it had hit all of the animals at about the same time, and it had hit them in astronomical numbers and without warning. The animals had no sign of sickness or injury. They had simply dropped dead. Also eerie was there was no records of mass die-offs of Saiga in the past, so this was completely unprecedented. How is it that so many healthy Saiga had suddenly and practically simultaneously died across such a vast area? No one had a clue. Richard Koch, a veterinarian and conservationist from the Royal Veterinary College who went to investigate the scene, would say of it, quote, "Mass mortality events are never nice things, and I've experienced quite a few, but the experience of the Saiga was unprecedented and unworldly. What is surprising and of great concern in this case is the size and the extent of this event. Entire herds suffered near 100% mortality, even after 40 years of work. I don't understand this." An investigation did not turn up many answers. There were found no signs of toxins in the animals' systems or in the soil, so the main idea became that they must have died from some sort of disease, perhaps in combination with changes in weather or vegetation. But it is not clear what sort of a disease would do this over such a short amount of time and in such a devastating manner. Also, diseases typically don't have such a complete mortality rate. And in this case, every single one of the animals in the affected area had been killed. One veterinarian would say, quote, "In biology, there's certain rules, you know. We accept that sometimes microbes can cause us harm, but not like this. Even very severe viral diseases or anthrax don't do this. A good proportion of the animals should have been fine," unquote. Other theories went into conspiracy territory, with ideas that included that it had been caused by radiation or some secret government experiment or even aliens. Scientists eventually found that the deaths had been caused by a bacteria called Pasteurella multocida, which had spread through the circulatory system to cause massive internal bleeding and organ failure. But this actually created new mysteries and posed even more questions. This bacteria normally live in the respiratory tract of the Saiga, and it is typically completely harmless. It is completely benign and part of their biome. So how is it that it had just suddenly gone berserk and killed these animals off, and why only in this area? Scientists figured there had to be a trigger and considered everything from climate change to insect bites or an accompanying viral infection that had caused the bacteria to go rogue. The main theory is that it was somehow caused by global warming, but in the end, there was nothing found that could conclusively account for it, and it has not really been adequately explained why more than half of the world's population of Saiga died so rapidly and mysteriously. The most tragic part of the story is that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, poaching declined, and there were conservation efforts put in place that had been sending the numbers of Saiga up to the point where it was hoped that they would improve their endangered species status, but this mega death managed to wipe out decades of conservation work in days. What happened to these animals, and how can we prevent this from happening again? We may never know for sure. So I find this, you know what I thought of when reading this was viruses raining out of the sky.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could look and see, like, you know, could there have been a comet? You know, that, I mean, just, I don't know. I started thinking of Wickramasinghe and like, because they're saying, okay, the bacteria in their gut, which is a normal, symbiotic thing that they have, suddenly went berserk. So if that bacteria was infected by some kind of weird space virus.
Yeah.
And it just changed
it enough, and then it just killed them all. But it's in this vast area, 65,000 square miles, and it killed every single one of them. Well, you know, that they could find out. I mean, how would you know if one survived and left? You know. But it's just...
That's wild.
Yeah. But yeah, it just made me think of... Or it could have been something else. I don't know. But I thought of... I don't know. I thought of panspermia and just stuff raining down out of the sky.
Yep, I think it's a good hypothesis there.
Okay, so from the following year, we have another unusual and inexplicable case. In August of that year, hunters in a remote area near, Hardangervidda in the southern part of Norway. It's hard and danger Vita. Whatever it is, the place is hard and dangerous.
It's hard to live, and it's dangerous.
It's a Vita that's hard and dangerous. Hard and danger Vita. In the southern part of Norway, came across a ghastly and macabre sight. There, scattered about, the bodies sprawled over the rugged terrain, sometimes heaped on top of one another, were a total of 323 dead reindeer. Like the Saiga, they seem to have all spontaneously dropped dead at about the same time, and there was nothing to indicate that they had been injured or suffered from any disease or malnutrition. It was as if they had just somehow been turned off. The hunters had never seen anything like it. So authorities arrived and were equally baffled. Samples were taken and found no signs of toxins, diseases, nothing. The best anyone could come up with was that the animals had possibly been huddled together in fear during a thunderstorm and then killed by a lightning strike. But this was a bit odd. How does lightning kill 323 large reindeer in one fell swoop? The deadliest lightning strike for animals ever recorded was 68 cows killed in Australia. And the deadliest of all time was when 91 people were killed by a lightning strike in 1971, but that was only because it hit their plane and then they crashed into the Amazon jungle. But a whopping 323 reindeer being killed by lightning would be by far the deadliest ever recorded. But how could it happen? And would it have been one strike that killed them all, or multiple bolts like a rain of lightning? A spokesman would say of it, quote,
we exhibit burns and stuff like that.
Yeah, I know. That was the other thing, was wouldn't it show wounds? I don't know. Damage? So a spokesman said, we've heard about animals being struck by lightning and killed, but I don't remember hearing about lightning killing animals on this scale. We don't know if it was one or more lightning strike. That would be speculation. They may have been gathered even closer together out of fear during a thunderstorm. So this is the prevailing theory, that the animals were close together and one or more strikes brought them down, but the carcasses were spread out over an area measuring 50 to 80 meters in diameter, or 165 to 263 feet. So they weren't all exactly up against each other and touching. So how could lightning kill all of them in one shot? John Jasinius, a lightning safety expert from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, explained how this might happen in an interview, saying, quote, animals do tend to group together in storms and huddle under trees. If lightning strikes the tree or somewhere nearby, the entire group can be killed. We don't know how common this is because it's hard to track, though usually it's herds of 10 or 20 animals that get killed. In the case where the animals are huddling under a tree, oftentimes you'll see some visible signs on the tree, though you may not see any visible signs on the animals themselves. Huh. In this case, it's hard to know where lightning struck based on the pictures, but there may be an animal among the dead animals that has a visible sign, like a bit of charring on the skin. When animals or people are in groups, most are being killed by the ground current. First, there's a direct strike. This is what most people think of when they think of lightning. That hits the tree or maybe the ground nearby. This energy then spreads along the ground surface, and if you're anywhere near that lightning strike, you absorb it and get shocked. Lightning goes up one leg, down another, and animals are more vulnerable because their legs are spread out more.
And
so the ground currents travel more easily in their bodies. It doesn't matter if they're touching or exactly how close they are. It matters that they were all in the area hit by the lightning. Ground currents are the thing that's responsible for the most lightning deaths and injuries in both people and animals. In this case, the animals seemed to be in an area that was 50 to 80 meters in diameter and on a hillside, which gives you some idea that lightning can travel a good distance and still be deadly. Lightning doesn't always travel deep into the ground. There's also the side flash. That's when an animal or person is standing close to the tree is hit by lightning, and the lightning jumps from the tree to the person or the animal. This side flash usually kills one or a small number of animals, not large ones like with ground currents. So the thing is, there was no evidence of a lightning strike on any tree in the vicinity or the animals themselves, and it is unclear whether there was really any thunderstorm in the area at the time at all, because it is so remote. In the end, although the lightning strike theory seems to be the most plausible possibility, no one is really sure how so many reindeer just suddenly dropped dead like that, and it remains a very bizarre case of mass animal death. Okay, so I think there's one more here. So even more recently is an incident that happened in 2020 in the Okavango Delta of Botswana in Africa. Beginning in early May of 2020, clusters of large numbers of elephants began turning up dead in the wilderness. Some seem to have just suddenly dropped dead very rapidly, as many of them had fallen flat on their faces, chest first, seemingly in mid-stride. There was no sign of injury or sickness, and they still had their tusks, meaning that it wasn't the work of poachers. And the elephants kept dying. By mid-June, the number had more than doubled, and it continued through the year, scattered across the remote, roughly 3,000 square mile region, until more than 350 elephants of all ages and both sexes had died. Probably even more than that, because carcasses can be difficult to spot in this rugged territory, in what experts called a conservation disaster. So the authorities were stumped, and there were very few clues to go on. Local witnesses claimed that they had seen elephants in the area acting in a strange way, walking around in circles in a disoriented manner before collapsing. And 70% of the deaths were found to have occurred near waterholes, but this did little to provide any real answers. The odd behavior is indicative of a possible neurological disorder, but what kind? The presence of so many carcasses near waterholes suggested poisoning of some sort, but no other types of wildlife coming to drink had been affected. Oddly, when authorities arrived on the scene, they reported that there was an odd smell and that nothing had really scavenged the animals, only maggots, which was seen as very odd in a place full of scavengers and where carcasses don't typically last long. So
that's weird.
Yeah, not only did they die in strange positions after acting weirdly, but then nothing would eat them but maggots.
Wow.
That is strange. So what had killed these animals? No one had a clue. Not helping matters was the fact that the Botswana had been slow to act on an investigation and generally mishandled and bungled the search for answers. The country is notoriously poor and low on resources for such things. And not helping matters at all was that this was going on in the middle of the pandemic, making it all even more sluggish. There was also the fact that the government just didn't seem to consider it a big priority, and they were very uncooperative, despite the fact that much of their income comes from ecotourism, from people coming to see these elephants, which comprises between 10 and 12% of Botswana's GDP. So Elephants Without Borders, a Botswana-based conservation group, did everything they could to speed up the investigation, sending GPS coordinates and photographs of elephant carcasses to the government and even offering to go to the site and fund an aerial survey of the area and remove the tusks to prevent poachers from stealing them. But the Botswana Wildlife Department gave them no response at all. What?
They're going to take the tusks to prevent people from taking them.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I thought that was weird, too. What are they going to do with them? We're going to take them, but to keep people from poaching them, from stealing the tusks and selling them off. I don't know. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. But the Botswana Wildlife Department gave them no response at all. The Botswana Wildlife Producers Association, a group representing game farmers and professional hunters, also offered to help by sending a team of local veterinarians and ecologists to go in and take samples, but they were denied and told that everything was under control. Due to these issues, samples were taken too late and were of low quality, to the point that some researchers who received them classified them as practically useless. And on top of this, they were not initially sent to any reputable lab. Mary Rice, executive director of the Environmental Investigation Agency in London, said, "We had the opportunity to thoroughly investigate the cause of these mortalities and manage potential future episodes, but we've missed it. There is real concern regarding the delay in getting the samples to an accredited laboratory for testing in order to identify the problem and then take measures to mitigate it. The lack of urgency is of real concern and does not reflect the actions of a responsible custodian. There have been repeated offers of help from private stakeholders to facilitate urgent testing, which appear to have fallen on deaf ears, and the increasing numbers are frankly shocking. It's a conservation disaster. This speaks of a country that is failing to protect its most valuable resource." Yeah, so there's a bunch more about how the government just kept dragging its feet. It almost seems like, they're saying, well, they're poor and they just don't really care, but is it really that they're just trying to keep them from finding out what really happened? That's
Yeah,
what
it
you
could be.
That's what you immediately start thinking. They have the other main thing that funds this government's or this country's GDP is diamond mining.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Clear out the elephants. You need to mine diamonds.
Yeah. So let's see. The Botswana government dragged its feet with its own testing. And in the meantime, the samples were sent by conservation organizations to a number of independent laboratories with more advanced and specialized equipment. But a series of mishaps broke some of the containers, and still others were mislabeled, and they were of such low quality that they could only be tested for certain things. They also lacked enough funding to test all the samples they had. Yet even with all of the hurdles, some things could be ruled out. The labs ruled out anthrax as well as cyanide, which is sometimes used by poachers, and tests also ruled out encephalomyocarditis, a viral infection thought to be spread by rodents. Indeed, these independent tests with these degraded samples could find no explanation at all for the deaths. As this was going on, there was immense international pressure for answers, and the news of these mysterious elephant deaths had made worldwide headlines. After several delays from the Botswana government basically saying, "We're working on it," and keeping the media at bay, they finally buckled under the pressure and came out with a response. Their verdict? The elephants had died from a Cyanobacteria neurotoxin, which are poisons released by blue-green algae that bloom in stagnant, nutrient-rich water. They explained that the elephants had drunk in these bacteria and then succumbed to the neurotoxins attacking the nervous system. But there was immediate disagreement from numerous scientists and labs on this explanation, and the mysteries only got deeper from there. According to many experts following the investigation, this neurotoxin, or these cyanobacteria neurotoxins, are an unlikely candidate. The most obvious reason was that no other animals had died from drinking this water, only elephants. So why would it only target them? There was also the fact that at least 2 laboratories claimed that they had no evidence of the presence of this type of bacteria, and the earliest of the mysterious deaths had occurred during the rainy season when flowing water usually washes away the blue-green algae. On top of this, many of the bodies were found on floodplains where this type of bacteria typically doesn't exist, and a 14-month review of documents and investigation by National Geographic found that much of the evidence leading to this blue-green algae diagnosis was unreliable. The elephants had also died extremely quickly, which did not seem to be consistent with this bacteria. For all of these reasons, there was a nearly unanimous response from wildlife researchers, scientists, and veterinarians that this neurotoxin diagnosis was premature, not based on good evidence, and not a logical explanation, and that more investigation needed to be done to find the real culprit. However, the Botswana government stood by their verdict and considered it case closed. So considering that the elephants stopped dying not long after this, and the fact that the available carcasses are long since gone, there are no new samples to test, there seems to be very little left to solve the mystery, and we are forced into mere speculation. Many questions still swirl. What killed so many elephants in such a strange fashion in such a short order? Was it perhaps a new unidentified type of toxin? Was it maybe a combination? Could it have been some kind of new disease? Why did it only target elephants? And why would it just kill them so suddenly to send them sprawled out face first into the dirt? At the moment, this is unknown. We don't have the answers to any of these questions, and the mystery remains. So what are we dealing with all of these scenarios? What managed to just strike these animals down in such large numbers and seemingly without warning? Is there something being covered up in some cases? And if so, why? These are among some of the strangest mass animal die-offs out there, and there are numerous questions we may never have truly have the answers to. So yeah, it was kind of a long article, but I find these things interesting.
Space viruses.
Space viruses, yeah. That does seem a possibility for these. But even, I mean, would space viruses cause scavengers to stay away from the bodies?
Yeah,
it's weird.
It doesn't make sense. Very selective. It's weird.
Oh, I see the watcher is trying to correct my pronunciation of something. I can't even tell which one it is.
Hardanger Vita. Hardanger Vita. That's the name of the place.
Okay. Yeah, so space viruses maybe. I mean, I guess a really big lightning strike could have killed a lot of animals.
not in that elephant scenario.
No, yeah, I'm talking about the reindeer one.
But I was thinking the whole time is that like I've seen one case of this, and that was in a single pond at the Schultz's place. We were like driving up there one day. I don't know, maybe you weren't with me, but like there was just fish all over the surface of the pond, upside down, just all dead, like overnight.
Yeah,
because we were there working, and it's like drive by one day and
everything's fine.
You knew they had feeders out there and stuff, and so you could feed them, and all these tons of fish would come up and eat.
Yeah,
and then next day we're driving up there, and they're just all dead on the top, floating on the surface of the water, and it was really eerie. There was something like I just remember just being like freaked out by that.
Yeah,
and I think I talked to Dan about it, and he said it was some kind of algal bloom. I mean, I think he had somebody come out, and I don't know.
Yeah, I remember. I kind of remember this happening, and they tested the water or something like that.
Yeah, something.
Yeah,
I just remember hearing that it was an algal bloom or whatever. It just like killed all the fish in the same day or whatever.
Right. Yeah, like it reaches a threshold and they just all die.
It's wild.
Yeah.
So I mean, I thought of, in some cases there would be. You could even have certain weather conditions that cause certain seeds to germinate that could have been in the ground for decades. And then suddenly they all sprout. And so the sheep are out there and they're like, and they all start eating it and they die.
Yeah.
And the sheep are very selective. Like we had 60 head of sheep in our field, and they ate all the Johnson grass,
right, and
left
everything
the
else alone. Yeah, cleared it out.
What?
Yeah,
it was awesome. Because we had before that we were like, God dang, Johnson grass.
Yeah, we spent a bunch of time trying to get rid of it, and they just went out there and selectively ate all that stuff until it was gone, or mostly gone. Yeah, I do remember that.
Well, we had it fenced off, and on one side of the fence there's still all this Johnson grass, and then on the other side there's none.
Where the sheep
it's
were.
Just perfect, pristine coastal grass.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can totally see sheep, like if some strange event or certain weather conditions or something, a frost or some, just whatever took place, that a whole bunch of seeds that have been in the ground and never germinated for who knows how many decades, just suddenly sprouted, and they just ate it all.
Yeah. You would think that they would have tested what was in their stomachs to try to find out what was going on, too, right?
It was just a thought.
And they're like, what is this flower that doesn't exist? Yeah. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying like that. It seems like it would have come up, but I'm just guessing there. Who knows?
Yeah.
But you had vets and people, doing.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I know that they looked for poisons and toxins and diseases and wounds and all kinds of stuff. And you'd think that they would.
But
check
like
the idea
that there would be some biological switch that turns on that, like with was it the reindeer, where they have this bacteria in their gut, and they just so happen to eat something that had a virus, or that had it somehow just turns on that
Oh, the Saiga. That was where I was saying
The Saiga, yeah, it
the
mutates
Saiga had
the bacteria.
They had a bacteria that's symbiotic that was
Yeah.
totally fine, and then it seems to have killed them all, which implies some kind of change to that
Yeah.
bacteria that happened over a mass area almost all at once. That's the other thing that's hard about it, difficult about it, is that it's
That's what I'm talking about with this idea of like,
Yeah, like
certain
all these seeds
just
sprout.
germinate because of a specific
yeah.
climatic condition that just suddenly brought them back from being dormant for a long time.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by seeds, though.
Yeah. How do they know?
They are strange eggs
Yes.
that don't die.
Yeah. And how do they know when to start?
And they're not alive, right? They're
Yeah, they're not
basically
really
not alive, but
Yeah.
it's so weird. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sort of changing the subject, but
No. Yeah, those are all good points. You know, the thing with the elephants and the no scavengers is a little weird. I don't know, that's a little strange.
yeah, that is definitely weird. Like they had a certain smell
Yeah.
that the other animals, that the scavengers could detect, and they're like, nope,
Yeah.
don't eat that.
Don't eat that. Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to be a scavenger, you probably should have some faculties for determining bad smells of the dead animals that you won't eat. Right.
Bad smells. Yeah. Quote unquote.
Yeah.
Some bad smells are good bad
Well,
smells.
our bad smells are good smells to them.
Yeah.
But it's like, that's what's a big part of the sense of smell, is like this warning system. Don't eat that.
Yeah.
And then in some, genius plants are like, I smell really good. And you're like, yum. And then you die.
Yeah. After eating them and spreading their seed, you walk somewhere and die with the seeds in them.
Yes.
It's
They're so mean.
yeah.
They just don't care.
That's right. It is an evil plot. It's like sticker burrs. Those are definitely an evil plot.
Oh my God.
You know?
I know.
Like, I'm going to make a seed that's basically spikes you, stabs you, so that you carry it somewhere and plant it somewhere else. Or in the same spot, you're just like, ah, and you pull it off and throw it, because you're mad.
They made it 4 feet.
That's right.
Next year they'll get 4 more feet.
That's right. Gonna take
And
over
eventually
the world.
they'll be everywhere.
That's right. Yeah.
God. I don't like them.
All right. I think it's break time.
Yeah.
That was a long article.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Snakes.
Back, ladies and gentlemen, brothers of the Serpent Podcast, second hour of the show, and yeah, that article was way longer than I thought it was. So Kyle spent most of the break accusing me of not understanding how long the article was.
Well, he speed reads so ridiculously fast that he thought the article was short when he read it to himself. I'm like, that was an entire segment.
It was.
It's all good.
Yeah.
Okay, so you brought up initially that this Fortean thing, and if you don't mind.
No, yeah.
So I've been delving into a little bit of philosophy.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I learned about this idea. I guess it's gained a lot of traction recently with philosophers, this idea of narrative playing a big part in human activity, what we do, how we live our lives.
Like a
and all this
group
kind of stuff.
narrative or an internal one? Or
It's all narratives.
Okay.
So like all fiction books, they have a narrative. Like think of, but the way I was thinking of it was more in the historical, like the myths and stuff.
Yeah.
So you got the narrative of like, there's the hero guy and he goes and he fights the dragon and he saves the girl or something like that.
Right.
Like, let's see, I'll have to try to tie this into Fort first, before I go further. But so the other thing is there's two hemispheres of the brain. There's the left hemisphere that sort of compartmentalizes everything, like chops the whole world up into little pieces that we focus, and that gives us focus. So you can focus on this one thing and sort of try to ignore the blur out the rest of the stuff so that you can do that. And then there's the right hemisphere, which is sort of taking in the world as a whole. And so these two hemispheres are in almost
that's how I can play Dragon Quest 11 without eating for like 11 hours.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
But it takes both hemispheres to do anything, right? Because if you have only the big picture, you can't focus, you have no focus, then you'll die, right? Like you don't.
Sure, yeah. You've got to be able to focus, but you also have to have big
right.
picture.
So you have to be able to focus on like getting food.
Yeah.
But you also need to be aware that there might be dangers when you go to get that food, and you could be killed on your when you go out there to try to grab the berries. You know, you could get eaten.
Yeah.
So you have to be focused on the food, but have the broader perspective of the world around you at the same time.
Yeah.
So these two. So I thought it was interesting that this is how it ties into Fort. That the right hemisphere is like there are no pieces to the universe.
Yeah.
Everything merges into everything else. So it's all one thing.
Yeah.
And then there's the left hemisphere thinking, which is more and more so, according to philosophers, some philosophers, that is sort of prevailing in our culture in the modern era because of the scientific advancement and the higher and higher sort of focused studies.
Yeah.
People know a whole lot more about less and less.
More and more minutely compartmentalized specializations. Yeah.
And because technology then takes care of all of the blur stuff around you, then you don't have to worry about keeping yourself cool. You don't have to worry about getting yourself food and water. You don't have to, it's getting rid of so much of that stuff that we can become more and more left hemisphere. And then we don't look at things in the big picture, and some people can be more. But we just tend as a society to compartmentalize everything instead of looking at the world in the bigger picture. Whereas, so then going back to the narrative idea, it's interesting how, if you think about this, what if there was no narrative in our lives? No myths, no stories. It would almost be like, I was thinking about this. What would we compare ourselves to in our lives? Like I remember as a kid having learned things from, say, like, the Bible school or something, where you have the story of this ancient character who does a good deed or something, and you learn the difference between like choosing between good and evil or something. You got that narrative. And that becomes sort of like, well, I want to be a good guy.
Yeah.
I know what good guys and bad guys do because of these stories.
Yeah, like
so
the
it's
Good
like,
Samaritan. Like you want to be the guy that helps the dude.
Okay, I want to be that. I want to be that guy. So the narrative gives you something to compare yourself to.
Yeah.
So if you got rid of all stories,
and sometimes you want to be Samson. It kills 1,000 guys with a bone.
Yeah. You want to be that strong guy, or you see that he fails, and then he redeems himself, right, while killing thousands of people and himself.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I don't really want to do that.
Well, we were just talking about, like, do we really want a comet impact, or see me, like, do you want to push the pillars down and kill everybody?
So the thing,
not really.
Yeah. So the thing that made me think of Fort again was the idea of like not having narrative at all. And even think about this, like your friends, they don't tell you stories. Your parents don't tell you stories. Like there would be, it's almost like you would be creating your own narrative by watching what others do. And I wonder if this is where the idea of instincts with animals come from. They're getting the narrative from just observation. But still, really to go full Fortean with it in terms of what is it called? Everything merging into everything else. Intermediatism.
Yeah.
That if we had no stories, then existence would be just this wide open field of nothing to compare life to.
Yeah.
And no goals. It's like I was like, wow,
Yeah, okay,
this idea of the narrative is actually a very powerful philosophical idea. That it is what guides us. The stories that we're given, and you could think about a culture, the stories that culture holds above others and tells their children and carries on, like actually form that culture because everyone is comparing themselves to that narrative, these predominant narratives.
Yeah.
So like we have this thing that's becoming more and more popular of like the superhero.
Yeah.
Right? The superhero has all these like amazing powers that are otherworldly. And it's like you can't compare yourself to a superhero. I mean, but we do, right? We as kids, like you're like, oh, I am Batman.
Right, because he's the only one without superpowers.
That's right. I just find
I
this,
see. And so, so that's
that compartmentalizes the structure of your life. And it actually makes a piece out of something that really is just completely wide open.
Yeah. Yeah, the superheroes thing you brought up, that's interesting. I think Christopher Knowles wrote a book. I think it's a book he wrote called Our Gods Wear Spandex. And that's exactly what he was doing.
They do.
Yeah.
I prefer robes.
Yeah. I prefer the robed gods rather than the ones that
Robes to the spandex.
than the underwear on the outside gods. Yeah.
So I don't know, thinking of like, yeah, dude, there is something about like when I, personally, when I've been in different places in my life, when I felt like, like, what am I doing? Like, I'm not living up to, this idea of myself and like the sense of self and like what I should be doing because of my own ideas of who I am and what I'm supposed to do or whatever. And where did those come from? They come from these narratives of like you as a kid, you learn about, say, we're told stories about scientists or the astronauts going to space and stuff. And it's like, look at what they have achieved. This story of this hero who went to space and walked on the moon. And it's like, I want to do, I want to be that guy or something like that. So you have this. And then, of course, I like using the story of like, whatever, slaying the dragon and saving the princess or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right. These are like all the video games we played, it's like, okay, you're this guy, you're fighting all the bad guys and then you save the princess or whatever. And it's like, as a boy, these stories sort of set this, they give you this romance sort of thing, or a good deed, overcoming hardship, working hard and like, and there's just the reward of finding the secrets and becoming more powerful or getting the
puzzles.
Awesome So it's sort of like we build these structures of like the expectation of life into our stories, and that's what we compare ourselves to. So that, to me, I'm realizing like this is incredibly important, I think, to a culture. What stories do we tell ourselves?
Yeah.
What narratives do we set up for the young generations? And, that's, I don't know. I just never had thought about it in that way, because when you think about it in the extremes where you remove all narrative, you don't know any stories about your grandfather or your father or your mother or, people in your family that did things generations before, or any fiction, nonfiction, ancient stories. It's like, what is the expectation of life? There's nothing.
Yeah.
It's like there's this wide open, pure survival, eat, and then you can see how maybe it would descend into chaos.
Yeah.
And also a culture could start telling each other bad stories that don't have redemption, that don't have virtuous acts and achievement and success and those
kind
kinds of things.
moral base or whatever.
Yeah. So then you're comparing yourself to what?
Yeah. You're comparing yourself to just the strongest guy
Yeah, things
nearby
like that.
who rules everything because he's faster and stronger than everyone. So he controls everything. So you're like, I want to be like that. And that's not necessarily good. Yeah. Yeah, it would be, instead of being a long, built-up set of cultural knowledge, it would just be whatever is nearby.
Whatever is happening,
In the present, yeah. So so this is why, what happened, for example, in South and Central America, in the conquest was so bad because it erased a lot of their story, right? So the culture just vanishes. Yeah. Because they set everything on fire or melted it down or whatever.
Yeah.
Killed all the leaders and the knowledge people because it was of Satan or whatever their excuse was. It was just a conquest, not just anything. It was a conquest. So they were just erasing everything or melting it down for bullion, and then you have the same thing with the a lot of the Native American tribes here are worried that they're losing their culture because of the same thing. They say that no young ones are coming and learning the old stories, right? This is how you maintain your culture, right? And so what you're saying is these guys understand that the narrative of their culture is contained in those stories, and if those stories aren't preserved, then it's not like their people die, but their culture does.
Yeah, because it's forming. It's a society forming thing. That's what it was. Just hit me so hard today when I was like, I'm like, what is this deal with narrative? So I looked it up as a narrative or philosophy of narrative. I just typed it in, right?
Yeah.
And then I read about it, and I was like, oh my god! It read a couple of paragraphs, and that's what hit me. It's just like, man,
Yeah.
this is incredible. I never thought of it this way. And I think that's fascinating. And then when you combine that with the idea of the right hemisphere, the left hemisphere of the brain in this sort of dance of compartmentalizing everything versus looking at the bigger picture. And I don't know, kind of thinking of what, I guess in some ways it gave me a possible insight or an idea that I had never thought of before about the question that we often ask and have asked many times on this podcast: who designed these myths?
Yeah.
And for what purpose, right? And the fact that they contain hidden bits and pieces of knowledge, or why do they spread so, how do they design them to spread in such a way? It's almost like, is that another part of it, that their design is to give you a bigger picture, but in a compartmentalized piece, right? You have this little story, but it's actually telling you about your entire life in a way.
Yeah.
So it sort of what's the word? It sort of goes towards our tendency to compartmentalize. So it gives us this little chunk, the parable. Mm-hmm. But in so doing, we get an idea of the big picture.
Yeah.
It's like a balancing thing, because you don't want to be out of balance. You don't want to be too much on the big picture side and not care about the individual things and the way your brain can break the world around us, the universe, into pieces. But you don't want to go the other way either.
Yeah.
And be so compartmentalized that you have no perspective.
Right. So it's like and then maybe you can see that in, just like with all of these possibly ancient, wherever this stuff came from, these stories, these myths, the structures, that part of what's so amazing about them is that both of those things seem to be equally present in strength in all of this stuff. Like with just looking at the math of the pyramid, you can spend all this time looking at the
One detail.
at the precision, and you're like, wow, look, this angle, if you check it this way, it makes this number or whatever. But then if you back away and look at the whole thing, it's also like the whole Earth. It's a giant map, and then you can focus back in and be like, wow, this one chamber has all this stuff in, but then the whole thing has all that stuff.
Wow.
And then
that's
there's
really cool.
then this passageway has all that stuff in it, but so does the entire thing. And then the stories are giving you, like you're saying, there's both the focus, right? So the focus is in the minute little details. Wow, there's a 72 there, and there's a 144 there, and then there's a 430, 432 here. But then when you back away, you see that the whole thing is telling you about this massive geological event.
Yeah.
Or maybe a cycle that lasts 25,920 years, but then in the minute details. So but it requires looking at both of those things. I've been going through these myths again recently, and it's like it does this thing with your mind where you're like you're focused on the details, and then like bam, you have to back way out and look at everything, and then you zoom way in again, and then you back way out and look at everything again. You're just like, how is this possible?
Yeah. That's really cool.
Especially when when they're being compared across the world, and you're seeing like, well, okay, here's the stories they tell here are the stories they tell here, and here are the stories they tell here. And then the picture that begins, it's the same thing on like a multiple scale. Because now you're focusing on little details in this story, just in this region. And you see all these details, and that makes you back out and wonder about the big picture. But then the same thing happens when you're comparing them across the globe, like with the flood stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
Or the civilizer gods. Like that just that whole mystery. Like, so yes, there is.
So think about the tools, right? The tools of civilization.
Yeah.
There are musical instruments, writing, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's like these are all the tools to create the narrative.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. It's like,
doesn't the same thing happen? And you just brought up music. The same thing happens with music. You'll sit there and focus on this.
Oh, yes, absolutely. You get, and that's the weird thing about music too. I'm
going to play this like finger riff over and over and over until I get all the details right. But then you could back out and listen to the whole song.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you're listening to music, you do the same thing. You're like, wow, you keep rewinding it just to listen to that one part. But then you realize that the entire song contains this same sort of feel or whatever.
Yeah. And with that, if
it's a good song.
If you completely compartmentalize it down into each note has no meaning.
Right. Yeah.
You get so far down to the bits and pieces that it has no meaning at all.
Yeah. Well, I told you to do the bendy thing. Next song.
And then if you completely only absorb it as a whole, you can't understand it.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like, I think this is like, I'm learning things from these philosophers. And I wanted to make the point because
did you expect that you wouldn't?
No, I didn't expect that. I'm just
Of course not.
This is why I'm doing it, because I want to learn. But I wanted to make this point.
I'm just saying you sounded surprised.
Well, you always want to give the philosophers a little bit of shit.
Yeah,
But
I'm actually learning things from these
they blow your mind, and you're like, damn. And then you go back to giving them more shit. But that's just the way we are around here.
That is how we are.
So I wanted to basically make this other point, because we did the Character of Physical Law series, and Feynman gives philosophers a lot of flack, right?
Yeah,
He's nailing them to the wall all the time. He doesn't like them. He's like, you can't claim to know anything about it, right?
Yeah.
Talking about psychology and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Well, yes, there are vagaries involved in these types of things.
Yeah.
But you can gain insights. In any case, I wanted to make the point that, that's coming from one of the guys that does the compartmentalizing. That's what he's good at.
Right. Yeah. That's right.
He's really good at that. And so, of course, he's looking across the aisle to the other, to the right hemisphere type of thing. And he's just like, bah, when you get all the way over there, there's no meaning.
Yeah.
Well, yes, that's true. When you get all the way over there, there's no meaning. And when you go all the way down to in the compartmental, or you can't understand it when you get all the way over there. When you go down to the compartmental, there's no meaning.
Right. Yeah.
And that's where they're at. These physicists. It's like, yeah, it's just bits and pieces of gears and stuff doing things, and that's it.
Yeah. You remember talking to Bosley, Walter Bosley, and he talked about how there was a point in history where the sciences were taken over by what he called the weenies.
I do remember the weenies. Yeah.
So science, like the natural philosophers they weren't these compartmentalization guys.
Yeah.
Now, some
people
people
doing what you were saying. They go to the big picture, they zoom in, they zoom out, they zoom in, they zoom out.
Yes, they constantly kept the big picture in mind because, and this is how they made such great advancements. Now, people today say that is no longer possible because of the, maybe back in Newton's day, people would just say, well, you could kind of study everything. Now, I don't think that's true. There's just so much stuff.
Yeah, I think there's still room for the great generalists.
Yeah, and the synthesizers, right? People who can have multiple fields and see like, wow, there's this giant connection between these two apparently unconnected fields of study.
And Feynman also was good at that within academia.
That's what I'm saying. I feel like this is what I meant to get to, is that I brought up the thing with Bosley and the weenies or whatever, and that was Bosley's way of saying that science was taken over by bean counters.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
And so it ceased to contain a kind of philosophical outlook that sort of encompassed a wider view of the world, of mysteries, of spirituality, possibly, whatever, that there's mystery involved here, and that, that it isn't just a giant accidental machine that we can just poke at until we figure out what's going on. That's not what's happening. That's the basic idea of these natural philosophers. And then there was this gradual takeover into bean counters, right? Or bean counting. And I think that Feynman is like he's always struck me as a sort of Renaissance natural philosopher kind of guy who's stuck in this compartmentalized system. You can see his tendencies of wider worldview, but he's in this system of...
Yeah, he's in the system, but he wrote books about going into the other department.
Yeah.
Right? He'd go to the mathematics department. Let's take a look at you mathematics guys.
Yeah.
I could do math.
Yeah.
And then he figures out what they're all about.
And he did like meditation, out of body stuff.
Yeah.
He experimented with all kinds of interesting things. You could see that he had if he'd have been born, a couple hundred years ago, he would have been a natural philosopher and just sort of...
Right.
But he was a product of his time.
Yes.
So this is, again, going back to the idea of narrative. What's the cultural narrative now is like science and compartmentalization has like strengthened, we have... People always say, well, like you can't build an iPhone by praying, or whatever.
Right.
But it's no one's trying to build an iPhone by praying. That's not the goal.
Dear dark gods. Please make me something that will ruin my life. Granted.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm definitely gonna be thinking about that, this narrative thing. I immediately went to the myths, and I just feel like that this idea was known, and has, in other words, that this idea of narrative, and of course this is a modern term for, to mean something in the field of philosophy, but the idea of narrative means something to society. We need stories, right, to shape society.
Yeah, it's like a cultural memory.
Yes. And of course,
guiding thread.
What would be the best one? Fiction is great, but you want your fiction to have some to have this element of truth
Yeah.
that can be taken as real. Like that was one of the great things about the Harry Potter world, right? Is
Sure.
that she stuck the whole thing in our modern world,
Right.
and made it get in there.
Convincing enough to where you're like, this could really be going on. And we would have no idea.
That's what's fun about
Yeah.
it, right? It's like, this is great.
Yeah.
So it's, and then of course, I mean, you're a big science fiction guy. The science fiction writers tried really hard to use the best knowledge and discoveries, the latest discoveries of the day to create these fantastic stories.
Sure. Yeah.
So the fiction is important.
They even had a magazine called Fantastic Stories. I mean,
Yeah. Fantastical stories. So however it's just, I don't know. I think I've just found this suddenly today, and I'm like, man, this is really awesome. And to try to basically take this lens, right, from the perspective of like how this shapes a society, and then again go back and with these eyes now look at the myths again, and just go to reconsider. Just keep that in my brain when I'm thinking about all this stuff in the future.
Yeah.
I thought that was cool.
Yeah, this is a bit somewhat off the topic, but still keeping with the myths. I was thinking, when we were harvesting this season, and maybe I've said this before, but you were talking about what is it called? Cluster closure, but when the clusters seal up.
Berry closure.
Berry closure.
Yeah.
Once I saw that, for the first year, we got some nice big clusters, and they were closed up.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, that's what that dude's holding. That's what the Apkalu are holding.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They call
it's
it the
not a pine cone. Yeah. No, it looks just like a wine grape cluster.
Yes.
That's fully closed. Like that tells you that it's got big, fat, and
It
healthy
makes these
berries.
little hexagonal or sort of.
Yeah.
They're not round anymore.
Right. So the guy's holding a bucket or something, and then this cluster of berries, and so that's the symbol. And I've been thinking about that.
Okay, so have you read The Immortality Key?
Not yet.
Am I breaking into were you going somewhere else?
Yeah, I was gonna talk about the symbols. Like I also the other thing about that. So if they're holding a grape cluster and it's always held up, it's
he's holding it out in front of him, so pointing it away from him.
Right, it's pointing away from him. Sometimes at the back of the king's head, like the Apkalu, the therianthropic person with the bird head, or even just even if he's not a therianthrope, he's standing there holding this grape cluster, and it's pointed at somebody or outwards, forward, but it's near the mouth. But then down below, they're holding this bucket, but there's always this, I don't know, I feel like this is an important detail, the way they hold that bucket. And you see this across, people call them man bags, whatever, but you see many depictions of this object being held, and it looks like it's heavy because of the way that their hand is placed. The fingers are going down, curving upwards over the handle, and the thumb is on top. Like it's a heavy object, or it's kind of like maybe the way people hold a lantern. Mm-hmm. So I've been trying to figure out, like, is this a source of light plus a fruit? Is it water? I don't know. I've just been thinking about these symbols, and the pine cone always really confused me. But
because people connect it to the pineal gland and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of see that, but it just seems like a pine cone was just a strange.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm like, what does that do? What are you planting some pine trees? Like, what is the pine cone for?
Well, I mean, if it's a cluster of wine grapes, then the bucket makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
because it's. I mean, that's the
he's
vessel.
holding the grapes and he's got the vessel. Yeah,
yeah, the vessel of wine, right? Like this is what it's made of.
Yeah.
So the reason why I brought up the immortality key is because his point is in the book. He's talking about Dionysus.
Yeah.
Dionysus and the god of wine, and then he goes back through all of the historical accounts that we have of the beginning of brewing, making beer at first, and then eventually making wine, and that there are certain funguses in the grapes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That cause these crazy hallucinations, and then he's kind of laying out some of the evidence for this. For example, would be in accounts of like drinking contests where it's like a guy drank a whole cup of wine,
Yeah.
and did not die.
Right. Yeah. Didn't die.
And so it's like, what kind of wine could they possibly be making where all these big burly guys from the ancient times are having a
What kind of lightweights?
It's like a couple of guys took 3 sips. One of them died. Another dude drank a whole cup and actually survived.
Yeah.
Won the contest.
Right. Graham Hancock has postulated that those buckets or bags or whatever contain their quote unquote stash. In other words, he's saying that it was psychedelic materials.
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of where you're going, is that if it's wine, they've got the grapes, they
have the bucket.
yeah,
with
there's plenty of initiatory rites or whatever secret society things where they use, psychedelic substances and rituals. So that could be what it is, that these are the symbols of, I don't know if symbols of office is the right phrase to use, but that these are symbols of some kind of very ancient knowledge and like psychedelic, a spiritual cult of some kind. Cult is also the wrong word. Like organization, group, whatever you want to call it. A brotherhood of the serpent. Mm-hmm. So I've, and we've pointed out plenty, and I know
there's so much vine and grape and symbolism, like in Christianity, it's like, you don't want to be the bad fruit on the vine and all this. There's sort of this, I am the vine, like God is talking about, I am the vine, and like, the fruit of the vine. And then, there's of course, the Jonah story. He gets swallowed by the giant fish, and then he's puked up on the beach, and then he goes, and there's like
he sleeps under the vine, and he's like eating it and then having visions.
Yeah. There's so much symbolism there with the grapevine. It wouldn't be surprising, I guess, especially like thinking of the transmutation, alchemy.
It's alchemic, yeah.
Converting this life-giving fruit into something else that is,
Yeah. So you're it's all the alchemy. You have the earth,
and it
the
symbolizes
air, the water,
knowledge.
and the fire, and then you make the fruit, and then you use the fruit to make some kind of brew that then can take you to the next realm.
Yeah, but it also symbolizes some kind of knowledge, right? The guy with the grape in the bucket is the knowledge bringer.
Yeah.
He's showing you like this from this in a way.
Yeah. So is this a symbol saying here's where the knowledge is coming from? It's coming from psychedelic experiences.
Yeah, it could be. But also, I
the reason-
would never say that it was only one thing.
Right, but the reason I'm bringing this up is because of your whole thing with narrative plus the compartmentalization and the wider view.
Okay.
Right? So
Tie it up. Let me hear.
that's what I'm saying is this seems to say that if there was an ancient civilization that was promulgating this information or made these myths, right? That all these symbols that are like these symbols of the knowledge givers, the bringers of knowledge are telling you, here's how you get it. Not by doing science.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
By doing this. And yet everywhere we see what we would think of as scientific achievements by these people, the beginnings of agriculture, architecture, astronomy, right? But are they saying that our source for exploring what we would think of in modern times as a scientific understanding, they were getting from a completely different method of study?
Okay.
Or are they combining it in some way? Because
Well, see, that's
the
what I
other
was-
thing about the narrative is you got to do both, right?
That's what I was thinking, is that it is.
But the strong symbol there is the psychedelic substance, if that's what those symbols mean.
But inherent in that symbol is the guy who knew how to make it. And he used something more akin to the scientific method.
He ate the shroom and then figured out how to make the wine.
But you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
if you're going to go through the process, this like, think about the ayahuasca thing. Like, how did they, there's the big question.
how do they
figure
out?
all this stuff out?
Yeah. And
So
they say
there's
the
both.
plants told them. Yeah.
There's both.
Yeah.
Right. There's the knowledge gained from this other way, and then there's also the knowledge gained in the what we would consider the traditional scientific method, which is a lot of things, but trial and error and
yeah, setting things on fire. Yeah. Okay.
Hell
Yeah, we got to take a break.
Yes.
Snacks.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. The final, very short segment, since we're almost at 2 hours already.
Questioning the narrative here at Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
That's right. Yep.
Wondering where some of them come from.
I feel.
I really have been looking at these old stories again and just... The more... And I know we've talked about this on the show before, but I don't feel like it can be said enough. The more you read a bunch of them in a row, the clearer it becomes that they're basically the same story.
Yeah.
And that just, I know that listeners of this podcast are fully aware of this, but it's just been, again, striking me powerfully that there has to be basically a single source somehow. And then somebody seems to have traveled around the world a long time ago and handed this information around to people.
And this is what I'm saying.
So like you have like there is in so many stories, multiple global destructions in different ways. There's fire and ice, there's water, there's wind in some cases, like great winds destroy the planet, right? How does that even work? Unless it's like, I don't know, superstorms. But every time, or at least the most recent one, I think somebody went around the world and propagated this information in an attempt to, like what you were just talking about, maintain some kind of continuous line across the catastrophe. And so is it, we know that we can trace our Western-ish civilization and many others back through time, through multiple different civilizations. We can trace it all the way back to Mesopotamia, and it kind of disappears into prehistory. And then there's like a blip at Göbekli Tepe that appears 6,000 years before that. And we don't know enough about that site yet to say that this is contained in the same system, except that people like Martin Sweatman and others have argued that it does because they're showing constellations.
Yeah, the common theme there is something represented in the stars.
Right.
It's like that's...
Yeah.
See,
and astronomical alignments and megalithic construction and architecture and agriculture, right? So there's this, we lose the thread when you go past ancient Egypt and Sumer, but it seems to, and it disappears beneath the sands of time, but then it pops back out right there at Göbekli Tepe, and it looks like the same thread, And if you follow the thread around the world, you see it in South America and you see it in Mesoamerica.
It's just, and it's just crazy when you look at like sort of the traditional way of telling ancient history. It's as though civilizations popped up because, people were farming and stuff, and then they started doing these things. And I'm thinking of it in a different way, that no, maybe, again, like saying that these civilizers or whoever was possibly spreading this knowledge, air quotes, that they had already embedded the knowledge into the system of stories.
Yeah.
And the stories are what civilizes.
Yeah.
It's actually those things. And so then that makes the bard or the storyteller or the sage or whatever it is, like this is one of the most important or influential characters of any time or any rising civilization.
The troubadours. Yeah.
The troubadours. And so it's like, no, civilization doesn't arise because we discovered farming or something like that. Like it actually arises because of the of the development of these stories that
Yeah.
actually bring people and make them common. They have a common comparison of themselves to the world, to life, or a common way of taking that compartmentalized thing and comparing their existence to it. And that leads them down a path that makes people common to each other.
Yeah.
And that's what ultimately arises in civilization. And somebody knew this
Yes.
way back then and used it
Right.
as a way to replenish the earth.
And so often, this is another thing that struck me, is that so often these ancient stories, especially the ones that have kind of been gathered, you know, the ones that we have like, still existing in modern times, where people have gone out and gathered this information from multiple cultures of different levels of advancement, that a lot of times this information was contained in old songs that
Yes.
were remembered by grandfathers that were taught to their grandkids, right?
Yes.
And so I'm thinking like, okay,
which is why harps and things like that are so common symbols of.
yeah, and it's also like, okay, so now you have a common thread of narrative, of story, of some kind of cultural context contained in songs, and it's like
Structure of life in a way.
And I was thinking, well, this is the language of the birds. The birds symbolize the music, right? It's like, here it is. It's the birds speak in music, and the old stories were told in songs.
Yeah, that's cool.
So is that possibly another way to interpret that strange phrase, the language of the birds?
Yeah, bird song. I mean,
Yeah.
that's cool.
But that again, there's also the other strange thing when you're looking at these old myths and legends is you see ancient attempts to destroy them.
And preserve them. That was the other
Yeah.
point that I was going to make. Is like I've asked this question for years. Like, who decides? Like, okay, the city is burning. Get
Yeah.
the stories.
Yeah.
Take them to a cave in the ends of the desert and bury them in jars.
Yeah.
Like, there's this. Who thinks of this when the city is burning or under siege? Right. It's one thing we think of it in modern terms. Like, well, you know, we would want to preserve scientific information, you know, so that we don't lose the knowledge of how to make things and that kind of stuff, that you would want to preserve that. But it's like, it's almost as though like, well, no, you're going to lose that because you're going to lose the entire supply chain in the first place.
Yeah.
Like you can't build that stuff anymore. It's going to be useless in a few generations.
But the old stories say that people were told to preserve the stuff so that the survivors could go and recover the knowledge, and that it would then help their great grandkids and stuff like that, right?
Right, but think of a textbook, right? Like
Yeah.
how well would a textbook do if you just lost the entire?
If you could preserve it over a long time, it would eventually start helping
it
people
eventually
again.
would help people
Yeah,
again.
that's what I'm saying. Is like it's that this requires a kind of long view that speaks of people who could think in those kinds of terms. That's the other thing I've wondered about with this. You know,
I'm just saying that in terms of like restarting a civilization or like giving that sort of initiation to make people common.
Yeah,
right.
the first thing you do
to
is
gather the scattered masses and bring them together and
Yeah.
make them have a common.
Yeah, you're like here, like around the fire at night, you tell them cool stories.
Yeah.
During the day, you're like, here's how you can make food.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Come down out of the caves. I'll show you how to, let's build some huts, and then eventually we'll build a
Start looking at the stars.
we'll
and
build
start
a big
watching.
hut where we can tell stories even when it's raining.
Yeah,
And then,
yeah.
and then that starts the idea of the central sort of communal gathering place,
Mm-hmm.
which eventually will become a town hall or a temple or whatever you want it to be. But you tell the stories, and yes, you show them the stars. This is the other thing is,
But the idea that these people would go to such great lengths to preserve written texts that are telling, in many cases, these fantastical stories.
yeah.
that's what I'm saying. It makes more sense to me now in that light.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I understand this. And then like the idea of like, is it Moses like freeing the
Exodus.
The Exodus, right? He has to give them something, so he writes the Torah, right?
Yeah.
He gives them a set of stories, to make them a culture.
Yeah. Yeah, because if they'd been slaves, whatever, for 600 years, they've lost all of that. And he's like, okay, you need to be a cohesive culture. I'm going to give you a start.
Yeah.
Here's a bunch of cool stories about how everything started and happened. And you're connected to it, Yeah, that's a great point. That is a great point.
So he knew, in other words, like if that story tells you that whoever wrote the story of the Exodus, if it actually was the guy who did it, or if it is a fictional story, the point is like, here's what happens, right? You give them this set of stories.
Yeah.
And that sort of makes them cohesive as a culture.
Yeah. So with the South American stuff, this is kind of what I've been thinking about with this, is that so much of the data there was destroyed that all we have left is the story of the guy showing up and giving them the stories.
Yeah.
We don't have the stories that he told them. Now in Egypt, it's the other way. It's the opposite. Like well, I wouldn't say it's the opposite. Just in Egypt, there's a lot more of the data.
Right.
But
the stories themselves.
But even that is, well, when you read through the ideas of what happened in these various temples or libraries or whatever, where they're like, the documents are falling apart, so we inscribe what we think are the most important bits of these thousands of documents onto the walls, then even that, you just have a fraction of the data, and the people who are writing this stuff onto the walls didn't really understand it anymore either. Right. So, but you just, you see in South America that it's like everything that Viracocha, or the feathered serpent, Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl, everything he told them is pretty much gone. All we have left is the story that he was there telling them stuff and teaching them things.
Right. I know. That's wild.
But in Mesopotamia, you have Oannes, and he does the same thing. He comes out of the water and teaches, he civilizes them. He's like, and he has attendants with him, and he was said to be scaled. And this is the other thing, is you look at the Sumerian depictions, and they wear these, the gods wear these, they don't have fish heads and stuff, but they do wear a kind of garment that is scaled. It's got these weird scales on it, So there's this sort of common depiction, like the serpent, the scales, the fish, the feathers, right? And I just wonder, is this Osiris in Egypt? Because there's the stories of Egypt that Osiris at some point left. He did all this stuff in Egypt, and then he was like, I'm going to go do this in a bunch of other places. And he went on this great journey where he supposedly traveled the world and also taught all this civilizing stuff to people. So is Egypt the origin of this? But how old is that? But of course the Egyptian stories go back a long time. But then and what I was bringing up earlier, I know I'm jumping around here a bit, but I was bringing up earlier, like, well, you have to have the long view. Like you wonder, like, well, who thinks of, save the maps, right? When everything's on fire. But if you live a long time, maybe you do think that way.
Yeah.
I
would suppose if you knew enough history.
Yeah,
that
it
would
could be if you knew enough history. But also we have the idea that the antediluvian people they kind of lived a long time, or at least some of them did. And it's not controversial now to say that before the end of the last ice age, there were multiple hominid species. So who knows? Maybe the Denisovan people lived a long time. How do we know how long they lived?
Right.
What if they lived 400 years?
Man, that'd be wild.
Elephants can live a long time. Turtles can live a long time. Like, why couldn't there be,
They have shells, bro.
That's right. The turtles hold up the entire universe, so we know that they can live a long time. But that's what I'm saying. So could you have a kind of a hominid group of more long-lived people that end up becoming the patriarchs of civilizations all over the world? and they can live through a disaster that lasts hundreds of years and then decide, I'm going to travel around and find people who are still alive and start teaching them, giving them the common thread of the narrative of our culture that just got destroyed.
Yeah, that's cool. Wow.
And then we still see like tiny little hints of that, and some cases large hints of it emerging from the depths of prehistory all over the world.
Yeah.
Like little, flames of knowledge that have lasted for thousands of years that were carried through the last cataclysmic period, the end of the fourth sun.
And it doesn't have to be that way. That's the other thing. There doesn't have to be stories. That's the part that really gets me. Like the idea of removing them completely.
Right.
And
like that's why the stuff with the Olmec stuff is disturbing. That the culture in China, where in other words, archaeologists find, okay, we found in deeply ancient times, somebody dug a deep pit and threw all these sculptures and other stuff in there, set everything on fire, and then buried it. Right. That's an attempt to erase.
Yeah.
The story, the narrative. That isn't just a sacking of a city or looting. This is an attempt to erase information.
Yeah.
So we have
that also shows you the power of erasing information.
Yeah.
The power of erasing just these stories, not scientific information even necessarily.
Yeah.
But erasing those stories, like redacting all of the faces and all of the stuff so that it can't anymore be determined. Like, well, what character was that was handing whatever was in his hand that was redacted to the whoever else was standing there with whatever.
Yes.
You can't tell the story anymore. And it's like, that's a long view type of thing as well. It's like that's going to erase a culture.
Yeah.
And I've just like, there's a lot of speculation as well. What sets us apart from the animals? Is this part of it that we are storytellers? Like we're not just
it's rock and roll.
Oh, that's true.
Some animals have thumbs. Some of them use tools, but none of them have rock and roll.
That's right. Be careful what you write about in rock and roll, because you might change the culture. Well, that was the whole goal of rock and roll, right?
Yeah. Bunch of hippies.
Oh, Jimi Hendrix. He paved that old road, oh boy. But yeah, it's like you have the immediate story that's taking place in front of you of your parents or something.
Yeah.
But you don't have any more context than that. So it's just wide open.
Yeah, that's a great point because the parent story is like very unequal, right? Some people have great parents, some people have terrible ones. But if there's a wider cultural reference frame, then you can get past that if you have a terrible parent story.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, you need something larger to look at. Yes.
I don't know. It's fascinating. That's
Well, I think we can wrap it up there.
It's a larger framework, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You gotta look at the details, but you gotta constantly keep in mind the bigger picture.
Yep. Great conversation, man.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that.
All right, you guys can get a hold of us, brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. I do have emails. I meant to read some on the show today, but we didn't have any time, so I'll do that.
Appreciate the emails, y'all.
Yeah, loving the emails. Keep them coming. So yeah, brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. Website is brothersoftheserpent.com. That has all the podcast related stuff, including the way to support us. If you get value out of the show, you can give us value back, and you can do that through Patreon or PayPal. And you can find that on the website. And yes, this is, I believe, the last episode of the month. So let me bring up
I think we have another
Patreon producers.
I think we have another producer today.
Okay.
This was August 17th.
Maybe.
This one already?
Who is it?
Michael. Burroughs.
Okay, no, we haven't done him yet.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, he's an executive producer of today's show.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Is there a note?
He says, Big Bang broke the law. Physics law says in the conservation of matter, total mass can't be changed in a closed system. So what up, bros? I totally love you guys beyond words. Snacks! Mick Dundee.
All right. Thank you. I agree. That's the one free miracle. I think that's what he's talking about.
Okay, I think maybe it's a typo. Big Bang broke the laws of physics
Yeah.
because in the conservation of matter, total mass can't be changed.
Right. So you have to start out with all the matter already there.
What's the matter with this?
Yeah. There's something the matter with this.
$157. Thank you so much, buddy.
Thank you. And Patreon producers, we have Philip Baklamov, Matt Shy, Peter Shell, Zachariah Baker, and Frank M. as executive producers for this week. And Daniel Gandy, Dave Cortes, and Patrick Hicks returns as associate executive producers.
Buddy.
Thank you guys so much for supporting us and everybody else who supports us in monthly donations on the Patreon and in the PayPal. Any support is greatly appreciated. We use it for podcast related stuff, traveling, emergencies, buying equipment, making the show better. So yes, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it.
Oh, Watcher just pointed out Moses with the golden calf.
Yeah.
Erases the culture of the golden calf.
Well, that was legit. It was that age was over.
The age was over.
Yeah.
That's true.
He's like, it's time for the ramp.
What's wrong with you people? All right,
That's
guys.
so 2,000 years ago. All right, guys, we love you.
Always have.
Always will.
Good night, Adamu.
Get back to work.